How's everybody doing?
Doing all right. Hope you are too.
Yeah. It's no longer Monday, so I'll call that a win.
It's remarkable how much of our lives are Mondays, though.
1/7.
About 8/7 in my
Not
experience.
Not perceptually.
I'll give it another minute or so for folks to show up, and then we'll get going. All right, we're at 3 after, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Everybody that had put an item on the agenda is in attendance, so I think we can go. So welcome everybody to the March 22nd meeting of the TAC. First on the agenda, we have Josh with a topic around workgroup charters.
Yeah, I added this last week, probably. So Chrome filed all those issues, basically saying like this issue is stale, should we close it? And then Jason Kirsten noticed like a bunch of those issues were charter reviews, and if you looked at the charters, a bunch of them were empty. Basically, it was just still the boilerplate. And so, I mean, I think this is one of those things the TAC probably needs to get on the working groups to fill out their charters. And then I don't know what the process is for approval or what happens next, but obviously like no charter, I don't think really flies.
There were only 1 or 2 that were blank. Many of them were the default. And in the TAC issue, I noted what changes needed to be done. But I agree, the TAC should probably spend some time and decide what we want to do. We talked about this yesterday in the Vulnerability Disclosure Working Group to kind of review our charter.
I will observe that the blank charters I don't think work for anybody because, for example, they assume the existence of a TSC that no one has, no one's ever had. I don't think anyone will have. So maybe there needs to be a quick rework so they don't have to redo the work 6 times.
A template update functionally, David.
Right.
Yeah. I think a template update is not a bad idea. I think that I'm going to get to this in my topic in a few minutes. I think it's worthwhile for the TAC to really ensure this is done well, which might mean taking some time in our TAC meetings to have a burn down chart or a list of all the working groups, walk through them together and go, okay, yep, these are done, these are not done. Okay, who's following up? Who are the points of contact for those working groups? And have that visibility come up into this meeting, not just be something we leave to GitHub to happen asynchronously. Like, let's shine a light on this part of it until this is done to our satisfaction, and then move on to the next part of sort of cleaning up the governance process here.
Maybe, yeah, I like that idea, Ava.
Maybe we can put an email out to the working group leads today and ask them to review their charters with their communities over the next 2 weeks, and then check back in with us at the TAC call at our next TAC call to report whether they feel it's done or no.
And Krob, did you, as you were looking at the various charters, maybe more recently than I did, is there, which is the best template to start from? If we're going to revise the template, is there a good one to pick that's closest to what we want?
There was talk about a template, but it was a dead link. It looks like the original TAC had something. They pushed it out to each of the groups to modify. So I can replicate that or identify one. There was one of the groups was very complete. They just needed to note, basically they needed to define what their TSC was, which was an artifact of the template itself, basically the body that governs the working group. And I suggested that that could be the contributors to the repository as a easy solution if the team didn't want to make their own. But yeah, I will be glad to take that and identify a exemplar charter that we can start from.
Yeah, to Arnaud's comment in chat, I think that's really crucial. When we send out an email to all the working group leads, giving them an example of what we expect.
Jory, would you be able to build the table that Ava mentioned around the list of working groups and then all of the requisite collateral that we could put into this working or in the meeting notes here, so that upon the next meeting we can kind of have that
Sure.
checkpoint around where do we stand?
Yes, and there was one repo. I just wanted to ask Krob if this was the format that it's this project-template repo. Was this the example?
Or even roughly whatever what they looked like.
That is the example of how the landing page for each working group is used. And I think that was more or less consistent. There's actually a specific charter MD file though.
Yeah.
And I wasn't able to find the source for that.
I just posted, Jory just posted in the chat a link to project template. Is that what you're thinking of?
That is the
Define-
landing page I believe everyone's using.
But not the charter.
But not the charter template.
That's right.
Okay.
Working
Yeah,
groups of
the
a
charter MD goes to a
MD.
404.
And yet most working groups have a charter.md file, which seems like to be a blank template that has never really been specialized to a given working group with a few exceptions. And I don't know where that charter MD files comes from, but it should be in the repo the project template, and it's not. So that's part of what I think needs to be fixed before you tell working groups, hey, make sure you in line with this.
So does it seem reasonable to set a goal for by the next 2 weeks we have that template finalized and get confirmation on this call that we're good with it, and then to send out an email and ask for that to be completed within 1 month from now? So basically 2 weeks to finalize the instructions, then 2 weeks to have those submitted. Does that seem reasonable to folks? I guess any objections? Maybe I'll ask of that way. All right, then we'll go ahead and note that in the meeting notes and go from there. Thanks, Jory, for helping with that. All right, next on the agenda is also Jory, meeting administrivia.
Yeah, so it's actually a great segue into sort of the other topic that I would love to kind of just finish polishing up. We had started to get, and this is before I went on leave, all of the working groups on a Groups.io mailing distribution list, all namespaced the same in Slack, all the working group leads identified, just like trying to eliminate that sort of hunting and pecking for where is X that I'm looking for. I've noticed that though we've kind of, some of our groups have started a pattern of using Google Groups to control access to notes documents. And this is kind of a problematic pattern because it does actually kind of it's another little paper cut thing for a newcomer, right? When you come in and you're like, oh, cool, I want to contribute. I want to add my name to this document. The first thing I hit is access denied thing. Well, that's kind of lame. And there's really nothing that we need to put behind that kind of access log anyway. These are just meeting notes. They should be public. And frankly, we should be PRing them into our working group repos when the meeting is over, because that's the record of the agenda. And so, I'd love to put out a recommendation to the group, and the PMO staff have talked about how we can roll this out to you. We want to convert all your notes docs to something that is accessible to anyone on the internet with a link. They can view it, and then help support you all by PRing your past agendas into your working group repos, and encouraging the use of a running agenda.md file or something a la the Kubernetes community, for example, or the CNCF community. Just making all of that a lot more visible and accessible to newcomers, and making that pattern very, very clean and consistent across all of our groups. This is a bit of a chore, hence why we're here to do it for you, because I hate for you to spend your time converting docs to Markdown. But I would love to kind of hear if that's going to cause duress for you. If you have an alternative preference, please let us know.
Thanks, Jory. Any thoughts or comments from the group?
So, Jory, are you planning to convert the Google Docs work meeting notes into Markdown on GitHub? Is that the...
Yes. So to be very specific, what's going to happen, or what I would like to do, what I'm proposing to do, is for each of our working group notes, which almost all of our groups are taking notes in a Google document, which is fine. I totally think that's great. But what we want to do is make sure that that link is not restricted to membership of a Google group. We have for you all shared external drive folders that you can use. So if you have working group materials that you want to put on Google Drive, we can do that for you and make sure that anybody that you need can access it and that sort of thing. We've got those folders for you. We'd like for you to use them because it makes it easier for you and us to help you share access to people who need it. And then worst case scenario, because we've definitely had this in the past, sometimes people host documents on their accounts, they leave their company, and then we lose access to those documents. And that's a big bummer. So we want to move those from those closed groups and from those restricted domains to something that's open. We want to update your calendar invites to the new notes document. And we want to PR in your old notes documents to like a /minutes folder or /meetings folder, so that the community has a record of the things that were discussed at past meetings, and those will be converted to Markdown.
I mean, if you or someone else is willing to do that, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I think what I would say is, why don't you start with pick a group,
yeah,
and start and work out whatever the process, and then just keep working through.
Yeah. This will be a one at a time sort of thing, but it could be a pattern too that we all help switch to, in April, for example, and then we will help go back and get all of that past stuff. But moving forward, we can adopt a pattern. Vicki, VM, you have your hand up. Sorry.
Hey, George. I just want to let folks know that this is pretty similar, not identical, but pretty similar to what SPDX does. So if you want to see an example of a live version of this, if that's helpful, it works really, really well with SPDX. The one big difference between the two is that they build their agenda and put live notes during the call in an Etherpad. And then they move them into the wiki, or sorry, not the wiki. Oh my gosh, no, into the issues and such. So that makes it a lot easier for people to just quickly type their name into the Etherpad. Yes, I'm here, rather than having to make a comment on an issue or anything like that. But yeah, it works really great. So if y'all want to head on down to SPDX and have a look. That would be, that might be helpful for you.
Jory, one other quick question for me. If we were to spin up a new working group, like for example, the securing package manager group, do we have a set of instructions for here are the steps to follow to ultimately get compliant with the process
Yeah.
that you're suggesting? Because I wonder if we need to write that onboarding as well, so that if we create new groups in the past, we don't just
Yeah.
churn on these.
We absolutely do need that documentation. And I think I'd send an email like a couple weeks ago saying, hey, let's work on this documentation together because we don't have it. And yeah, we want to make this something that is largely, clone this and off we go. And make it that easy. So with apologies to the securing software repos group, which I will be kind of fixing a little bit, you need that, and we will get that for you.
I would suggest writing as you go so that we know, okay, this is what we're aiming towards.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're doing the conversion, I mean, I think a lot of the concerns go away, but just noting, hey, LF's going to do this for everybody's, we're going to do the markdown conversion, for example,
Yeah.
and you don't have to do it, then that will eliminate a lot of worries.
Makes sense. Does it, I guess, what are folks' thoughts in terms of, I guess, going back to the previous discussion around charters, do we need a separate column for kind of just tidiness and cleaning up some of these issues and have a checkbox to
Yes.
say, hey, as we go across the working groups, we've got charters done, we've got mailing lists done, we've got meeting notes process
Yes.
done, just to go through and again, make sure that we've got everything in order.
I'm just going to jump in. I think a risk we have is repeating the past, where different working groups do different things here. Some adopt tools, some don't. Jory, since you seem to be able to empower people with these new tools, I'd love it if you were the sort of point of contact as working groups or projects are onboarding. If we can point folks to you to say, Jory knows where the information is, not that you have to write it all, but that you would know where those documents are landing, where they're being written, the state of drafts, a single point of contact for any team or working group that wants to start adopting these. Can we all agree that a single person should be the sort of point of contact for what's the current status of the guidelines for all the working groups? At least for that part of it. How do we onboard to groups.io? And I really want to reiterate, having meetings or meeting minutes in private or not on the public calendar in a lockdown group is really an anti-pattern that I'd like us to all avoid and encourage everybody in the OpenSSF to avoid.
So Jory, are you willing to be that point of contact plus a backup before we all pile in and say that sounds great?
Yeah. So absolutely. This is the kind of support that I hope you all come to expect and trust from the LF program staff. I have backups. Jen and Kahil are awesome individuals, and they're learning the tools as well. So that they know what I know most of the time. So yeah.
Yeah. So Jory, here's what I would propose. That onboarding doc. Why don't you try to write that first? I'll try to help. Use this, and a brief mention about why certain things, basically things like this helps us avoid losing data. And then once we know how that works, then we can slowly move groups over to it once we know what the objective is, and people will hopefully be less likely to work unintentionally against you.
Or themselves.
Basically not, once we know that we're trying to do this as opposed to just, hey, I just choose whatever and it doesn't matter.
Melba had asked a question in chat that I want to address about normalizing websites and blogs related to OpenSSF, and namely the issue being that it's not clear when a project is or is not affiliated with OpenSSF. For example, the SIG Store website, which is super pretty, doesn't really have any mention of OpenSSF on it. So what we would like to do, and this is a common pattern across other LF and umbrella foundations as well, is just have a standard footer that we provide. But that's something that we haven't really discussed yet with projects or proposed yet, but that would kind of let the person know, hey, this group is part of OpenSSF, and it's part of this working group, or these policies apply, or whatever. So hope that answers Melba's question.
Sarah?
Thanks, Bob. I would also love to mention that we have some confusion as to which projects are actually part of the OpenSSF, because as of my last understanding, SIG Store was donated as an independent project to the LF All Up, and we need to make a decision to move it to the OpenSSF once we have criteria to accept projects. Though I may be behind on this, so somebody correct me.
Yeah, you're behind on that. That was already voted
Brilliant.
in. Okay, so that's okay. That's okay. That was voted in and approved, and everything's fine. So we don't have to worry about that one. But it's fair to say that there needs to be more done about documenting entry and so on, which I believe is next.
No, I think that's fair, Sarah. And I've gotten the same question around salsa as well. So
Yep.
I think just making sure that we're consistent around what is in, making sure that, again, to the checklist and everything else, that we cross our T's and dot our I's to make sure that we have our act together, and we seem like we have our act together. Is definitely
that's two different things and very important.
They are very two different things, absolutely. So.
Yes, the concern that I have is that if we have a process to accept projects, that's awesome. Now we have to go through the motions and get them accepted and then add those footers, because that's the piece I would like this to look more like it's official and that it's all tracked in open documents the way we like in open source.
Yeah, part of the challenge here is that there isn't an official list as far as I've been able to find. And David, as far as the vote you mentioned to approve SIG Store, just because I didn't know that either, I would love it if there's a reference. I couldn't find it when I skimmed past minutes from TAC meetings.
So,
maybe I overlooked it.
Did David say, so we need to disambiguate then, because I heard David say we'd accepted a process to accept projects, not that we had accepted SIG Store.
I heard David say we accepted SIG Store.
No, I believe it was specifically voted on by both the TAC and the governing board. The TAC voted to accept it in the old TAC, not this TAC, the old TAC.
What is it? Is it the project, or is
no? It is SIG Store. No, it is SIG Store specifically.
Okay.
So the previous TAC voted to accept SIG Store, and the governing board voted to fund, because the governing board is who decides funding.
But it's on page 19 of the TAC notes is the note of the voice vote.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
That same document that we're editing for that.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I love that it's tracked. That's all I was looking for. We have not seen it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in the TAC notes, right? It's in the TAC meeting notes. But but the same is not true for Persia or the package repositories nascent working group. Neither of those have been formally approved. So the issue of we need to make this at least up to this point, the mechanism has been TAC votes and you record it in the TAC meeting minutes. But that doesn't mean that's the right process.
Right. So the follow on here is creating, since the GitHub project, OSSF/TAC has a list of working groups and projects. Just ensuring that that is the correct canonical place to list all of this and make it visible to the world, and that we are always updating that when there are changes. And I do see a SIG Store listed there now.
Yes. The bigger challenge the biggest challenge has been working groups accept sub projects within them, and they have not always been consistent about documenting in their GitHub repos projects accepted or not.
Yeah, and that's part of what we're trying to change right now. clean up that connection between the TAC and the working groups. Right. We need to know who the points of contact are, know what all the working groups are, and have regular check-ins with them. I might even go out on a limb here and say that working groups shouldn't accept code projects without at least visibility by the TAC. Not that we need a full review, but like just an awareness that, and there are, well, the Linux Foundation, I'm sure, has views on accepting IP without Linux Foundation lawyers getting a chance to look at it.
So I think that's probably the biggest question here for the group, the TAC here. Historically, the individual working groups have just accepted and taken on at least starting new projects without raising it up to the TAC. I don't think it's insane to say we accept it in principle, but we'll raise it up to the TAC for questions. And Ava makes an excellent point. If it's a pre-existing project, maybe an opportunity to, hey, is there anything that we should worry about, particularly if it didn't start with an open source license in the first place. I think that's a decision for the TAC, but here you are.
I'd love to jump onto that for 1 second, because yeah, I think you've hit on exactly the right difference, David. When working groups go, oh, we have a need and we should make, a widget, that's different from when, one of our companies shows up and says, I have a widget, it's an 80% widget, but I want you all to love it and, spawn it. So that's a very different thing that takes a little bit more process in my experience when you bring a whole project in.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point, Sarah. I guess back to the same sort of dialogue around, we need to survey and get ratified the current view of what exists under each working group and a status as to whether it was officially voted on, and we need to continue to clean up and do a review is to check all those boxes. We should certainly do that, in my opinion. But in parallel to, if we are, I know Ava and many of the issues on GitHub, we are trying to formalize a donation process. And so what I would want to try to avoid is changing the criteria as we go along versus if there's good work already going on, we just need to make sure that we're aware of it and that we document it so that everybody feels like there's a fair process that's documented. But relitigating past decisions, if they're already documented in TAC notes, I would vote that we probably not go down that route if at all possible.
Well, I would cut the line just to say, I think it's going to be important if we, as we do the investigation with working groups and projects, uncover that some projects were donated or contributed to the foundation without the appropriate legal instruments, not the right word to use. Like if a company has a trademark and they're contributing the project to a foundation and that trademark is not handed to the LF, like there is a process. I've seen other projects walk through that process in other foundations. And if we do find that that has not been done, then we do need to revisit those acceptances and help them. And I'm not saying then reject them, but like, oh, well, then there's work to do and the LF can help us do that work.
Trademark, I think, is the key
have
thing.
their hands up.
Yeah, I was just going to go to them.
Hey, so I'm only a few months into OpenSSF here. And this conversation does answer some questions I had rumbling around in the back of my head as far as, how is this even done? And why are projects showing up to working group calls asking to be considered when it's actually a TAC sort of thing to guide the technical direction of, that's the whole technical advisory part of the TAC. So this answers a lot of questions, and it's really, really encouraging to me to see that these are the things that the TAC is taking on right now, because they are very important. It's a shame that it wasn't done earlier, but it's being done now, and that's great. And I want to give a big +1 to Bob's, don't relitigate past decisions, just clean them up if necessary, to Ava's point about potential trademarks if necessary, and other IP stuff. Otherwise, it sounds like this is all headed in the right direction, and I'm very grateful that this work is happening. Thanks for everyone.
Hey, so I would like to kind of ask for some advice from TAC on a project which we're working on, and let me officially put out there that I think the project which we've been working on, Persia, is in this gray area. So when I say gray area, we've been working as a bootstrapping project, which was approved by the previous TAC to start in that phase within OpenSSF. We've basically been following the charter in terms of having meetings, posting public notes, like doing all the community process which we need. But we're in the gray area because we've never actually been approved and technically vetted. I think where we've kind of normed as a project is we're focused specifically on the problem of distribution of secure open source binaries. So what I'd like to propose as a way forward on this project, and I'm looking for feedback from TAC members on what they think about this, is I think it'd be helpful if I can present either if we have time this meeting or a future meeting about what the Persia project is, and then see if it makes sense to actually include it as an OpenSSF effort officially.
Steve, I don't think we're going to have time in this meeting. I think the TAC kind of needs to clean up our process for accepting projects, and I know that isn't the answer that is exactly what you want to hear right now. But I think we really do need to focus on how do we evaluate technical projects coming in, and how do we make sure that working groups, when a working group accepts a project, that's also visible at the TAC layer and across working groups.
Yeah, but as I think the key is we need to move on that, because the poor Persia folks have been kind of stuck, and there are actually two issues, accepting in, and there's some question about the name Persia. I know you've done a lot of stuff with it. There have been some questions, but I think those two things can be separable. And I don't have any personal objection. I think there were some other folks who had some objection, but I think we don't want to have them just dangling forever. We need to. That's not really fair.
Okay, and I think to help this as well, one of our project members from Deploy Hub also put an example in issue 83 of how the CDF handles projects which come from within technical efforts, and also how they handle project intake. So hopefully that gives a good example of how to handle those two situations separately.
Can you put a link somewhere in the notes or something?
Yeah, I'll put a link in the notes to that.
That'd be great.
Yep, thanks.
I would also plus one, like we don't want to keep kicking the can down the road because it's not fair to the team and the good work that's being done. I would say there's a bit of a chicken and the egg problem though, in terms of us pushing this forward and then it getting dropped off as we get into conference season and folks start traveling again. My concern is if we don't draw a line in the sand and get this ratified and get it published correctly, that it's going to continue to creep on. So what I guess I would throw out for input on is that we set a date on the calendar to say, let's have the document published, and then the next meeting, if you're open to this, Steve, we would basically start that process with Persia officially in terms of the actual donation discussion, so that we have a deadline of, and I'm just throwing out numbers here, but let's say that by the third meeting or second meeting in April, we will have a proposal that comes to a vote for the TAC around what that process looks like. And then the next meeting following, we would immediately put you on there. So we'll have a date to get closure of the process and then immediately schedule you so that you can take advantage of that process once it exists.
Yeah, no, that would be fine. And I'm also interested for that we come up with a process and we know how to handle this in general. So that would be great.
And just pulling in a point from what I wrote in chat, I think we should both set a date and set an owner, possibly multiple people who all work together, but still one owner, and a work stream parallel to this meeting, since 1 hour every 2 weeks with all of us isn't enough to really drive this to rapid conclusion.
I have a unique idea, I guess. The CNCF has a very impressive donation process. What if we just steal it?
That is the basis of the work that I want to do and have talked about doing. It takes effort. It takes
Sure.
like significant time to copy those documents over, massage them into a format that works here. And I would love help. Like, we're all busy and stretched thin. But I think my point is setting a deadline for ourselves and then picking an owner who is going to have this be their dedicated focus until that date, and who else is signing up to put in 10 hours a week of work on this, not one. Like, it's going to take actual effort to complete this. But I completely agree, Josh. Like, that is the baseline I intend to work from. I'm looking for a show of hands.
Yeah, I was going to say, so leaving aside CNCF process for its merits versus others, which I'm not trying to weigh in positively or negatively on, but more of the, do we have a group of volunteers that correct me if I'm wrong, Ava, it sounds like you're putting your hand up to say, I'm willing to help. Are there other people on the TAC or otherwise that are willing to commit? I see one comment already from Sudhindra.
Yeah, I raised my hand to help. Yeah, let me know how I can do it.
Great.
I'm sorry, who is that?
Sudhindra from Persia.
So my back of the envelope guess is it's going to take 1 to 2 people about 20 to 40 hours of focused time editing and munging and massaging documents to get these to a shape where we could have a TAC review, and we could spend half an hour in a TAC meeting where everyone has pre-read that set of documents and then together discuss the finer points. But that's, let's say, 40 hours for one person to write them, followed by 2 hours for every TAC member to review them, followed by half an hour in the TAC meeting dedicated to that topic, then followed by any further edits to finish polishing. Something on that order, I think, is what this is going to take. So who's got a week or two to dedicate to this? And if the answer is,
I can offer significant time on that. So let's talk, Ava, and I can DM you my email address.
Josh also put his hand up for not 10 hours, but 2 to 4. So maybe he could be a reviewer or
great.
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Josh and Joy.
Yay, Joy.
And this is Arnaud. I already had reached out to Ava last week to say that I was happy to help.
I'm willing to help as well. I guess what I would add is let's also use the mailing list here. We can put out a call for any other folks that want to participate, and then we can schedule maybe a kickoff discussion to divvy up the work and provide some structure. But I think having a target to come back with a draft and some maybe kind of, trying to think of the right word, kind of some guideposts or some guide rails around, hey, we think we're headed in this direction, get some initial feedback from the TAC in a couple of weeks, so that we aim to try to drive that to closure over the next month. I know in some sense it's a lot of work to be done over the next few weeks, but I think it is very important work that this group needs to own. So I guess, Ava, would you be willing to send out that email to the TAC mailing list, and then we can try to drive to get together here as a group, at least of the folks that have added their name in the comments or raised their hand in this discussion? Would you be willing?
What I'm hearing though is a lot of folks have enough time to review, but no one has come forward and said they have enough time to do the initial writing, which probably then falls back to me.
Sudhindra said he had time.
Oh.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah,
Ava, if you can
well.
lead me through, I can help with writing and copying over, or I can do the grunt work, and then you can come in and clean it.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And Bob, did I hear you chime in there?
Yeah,
fantastic.
I'm willing to help write as well.
Fantastic, thank you both.
All right. Any other points on this note? Otherwise, I know that we're kind of segueing into another related area around issue triage, but I don't want to cut this off too quickly because it is very important. All right, I'll take that silence as we're ready to move on to the next issue. Ava, that's also yours.
"30 seconds while I clean up the notes so that I don't forget who just put their hands up."
All right, well then maybe I'll pivot to David Wheeler on the next one, since I think it's just an FYI and may not have a ton of discussion after it.
Yeah, so this is really just an FYI. The OpenSSF fundamentals course was one of the first things that OpenSSF released. But I've just recently found that the plan is to open it up also on a second platform managed by LF, by LF itself. And the reason to do that is so that we can issue free certificates showing that they have learned the course materials. The plan is not to get rid of edX. A lot of folks use edX, and we want as many people to learn the materials possible. I just found there's been concern for a while about how do we deal with the costliness of the certificates on edX. And when I just came back for some health issues, I found out that this was a new plan, but I'm all for getting the information out and getting more people certificates. So if that helps, it's awesome. But didn't want to surprise anybody with that change. So got further questions, ask me. I will try to find out answers. Anything real quick? Thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
Okay, coming back to my GitHub issue triage, one of the things that I have seen similar communities be sort of facilitated by as they're moving to GitHub, using GitHub more, is having a consistent set of tags that all the projects, at least at the top level, the TAC and maybe the working groups use. Technical projects might do their own thing because they have a different development cycle. And then in their actual weekly meetings, take a look at that list on GitHub with a little filter applied and go, here's the, more than a week old, pretty important. There's been some discussion. Let's talk about them, and actually use GitHub as a tool to surface up those issues from their own tracking. We don't currently have a template or guideline for what GitHub tags to use. I think the TAC and a couple of repos I tracked are just using the default set. So I would like to propose that as part of the sort of overall work we're doing, one tactical thing we do is create a set of GitHub tags that can facilitate a more focused discussion on these sorts of work. And then that becomes part of the template that working groups are encouraged to adopt. I see a thumbs up. Do any working groups already use GitHub tags like this? No? Any concerns if I copy from a different community like the CNCF? Okay, then I will take that as probably the first action by the next, on the way to getting to the next TAC meeting, that's already in place and something that we're using. Great, thanks, that was easy.
All right. And last item on the agenda is Crobe around vulnerability.
Yeah, hopefully this is a quick one. Last year, the Vulnerability Disclosures Working Group created an OSS Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosure Guide, and that was a project within the OpenSSF's Git repo up off the head end of everything. So I'm curious, should we do a similar thing? We have a new project the group wants to work on about a similar CVD guide, but this time focused on security researchers to try to help them have more productive engagements with open source maintainers. So do we want to make a top level project, or do we want to try to nest that down underneath the group and potentially move the existing guide underneath the working group? Thoughts?
So my thought on this is like, it's your working group, do whatever you want. But like my personal thought is like, we already have too many damn repos. So any way to reduce them makes me happy.
There's a lot of repos, I agree. And the reason I would ask, if the team here said, copy what you did before, I have a permission challenge, so I would need assistance doing that. If it's underneath our working group, I can manage that. Thank you.
I guess the thought that comes to my mind, Crobe, is not so much about where to put the repo. It's what can the OpenSSF be doing to make sure that folks are aware and driving eyes to those guides and making sure that we're actually amplifying that message, like where they end up in code, whether it's in a subdirectory somewhere versus a new repo. Like, I agree, more repos just makes it more confusing, but I guess from a prescriptive, if you have some questions about these topics, are we actually helping to guide people to this content?
So we do have a action plan for that. We're going to try to, we're submitting to announce it at Black Hat this year, and going to try to tactically work out a plan how we can start to advertise these guides and their use. But we would welcome feedback on how we can amplify that. We did a blog, I think, for the last one. We probably would also do a blog for the new one through the OpenSSF.
Gotcha. David?
Yeah, I was just saying, for smaller things like this, I would say just put them in, I would say in general, let the working group decide if it's better as a separate repo or just within the repo of their org. In this particular case, I think within the org is the right solution. Carry on, go forth. I think as things get larger, particularly if they're their own code repo that has kind of their own life cycle, I think that, creating a separate repo is actually the easier thing, because then otherwise you end up with this weird mixture of it's not clear where the boundary is. So I think each working group needs to decide which boundaries make sense, and go from there.
Vicky?
I'm a big +1 on the new repo. I'm also, I understand Josh's point that we just have so many repos. I get it, but having a separate repo and then pointers to it does make it actually kind of more discoverable in times. And it also, if this is something that really takes off, it'll make it easier to convert that repo into, for instance, its own website, right? Which we can then point people to quite easily as a microsite, or otherwise used with the nascent and budding OpenSSF marketing, right? To have them help us expose that a lot more. So if it turns into its own sort of thing, then that also makes it easier to provide access to a different team. So yeah, I get you. There's a lot of repos out there, but I think in this case, it's a really good idea.
To David's point, the working group sent me here because they wanted guidance. You missed the call, sir. You're too busy teaching people.
I actually have a signed contract says I can't show up then.
Learning.
Yeah, learning. But in all seriousness, I don't know how this group would. I mean, I guess we could make some general guidance, but I hate to micromanage at that level. Other than, if it's helpful, create a new repo. If it's not helpful, don't.
Okay, we're gonna make a new repo, and I need help doing that because I don't think I have permissions.
Okay, we can definitely. Jory and I can definitely help with that. In fact, Jory, you're probably already on it.
Yeah, actually.
Awesome.
Just
Thank
tap out what you want the repo name to be. I'll get you on there.
I will send you a mail.
Perfect.
Awesome. All right. I think we've gone through everything that was on the agenda for today. I guess one last call for any other topics for folks who'd like to raise.
So this is Arno. Speaking of GitHub Access, and there was an open issue on creating a settings configuration file. Which
Can you repeat? I only heard half your sentence, sir.
I'm sorry, I have a little bad connection, but so I submitted a pull request against the TAC repo to create a configuration file that should give all TAC members right access to the TAC repo. But there's a bootstrapping issue because some people have looked at it and say, yeah, that looks good, but I can't merge it. So somebody who has actually merged privilege needs to do that so we can get out of the situation we're in.
I guess in principle, it makes sense to me that the current TAC membership should have right access to the TAC repo. I think there is Yeah, I think there is a broader question about the GitHub permissions to the GitHub repo itself. There's a least privilege issue. Some of you were already aware, if you grant total ownership to, for example, the entire GitHub org, that means that anyone with those privileges can delete the entire org, which is yikes. So Crobe is giving a face. That's right. So we want to give people every permission that they need, but we don't want to create a dangerous situation where if somebody's account is taken over, bad things happen. To the extent we can reduce the risk of that. Yeah.
Want to
Crobe, me
consider,
too.
do you want to consider using something like the Kubernetes tooling, which gets to much more fine granulated roles and responsibilities? I'm trying to remember. It's Prow and something else.
Prow.
Yeah.
I don't know if we need that exactly, but
if we're trying to push away from the TAC for decisions and doing, then we need to be able to empower people to do things.
Yes. So this is a thing that I've run into in many other projects. GitHub does not have a fine-grained permission system. It's not set up for very large organizations like the OpenSSF or the CNCF, or even Kubernetes, right? Prow was created by Kubernetes when they needed per directory permissions. And so if we are already at a scaling point where we need either per repository or per directory permissions, we need something like Prow. And Prow isn't the only option out there, but it is the one that's sort of most adjacent to this community. For those not familiar, the elevator pitch is it lets you define in YAML files in your project which accounts have what permission as far as merging or making changes down to the scope of an individual directory or an individual repository, and changes in those permissions are then tracked as code changes in the project, not as settings in GitHub that are mostly opaque.
It gave us an audit trail, which is one of the big things. Plus, it gave us the ability to offer merge to people who didn't, who didn't have additional permissions, and it gave people the permission to review and approve, and then bots could go auto merge things, etc.
Yeah,
because we tried to move away from humans.
To Arnold's comment in chat. There's a difference between giving someone the ability to merge a change and giving someone control over the repository on GitHub. And GitHub doesn't really have that sense on its own, right?
So I generally, I see that Prow is a very useful tool. I don't know that we have a good handle on what our current problem is right now, let alone suggesting how we might fix it. So I would rather we got a handle on that first and then decide what the right option is for fixing it, because otherwise we're just adding a lot of complication that we might not need, right? And you can't unring that bell. It might be good to just figure out the problem first, then solution. But it's good to know that there are some tried and true alternatives out there that we could turn to if necessary. However, I'd like to see what else is out there. What are the other alternatives before we just jump at one because CNCF does it, right? Which seems to be something that a lot of projects do. I know they've done a lot of great work, but it isn't always the best fit for everyone, right?
Totally agree, Vicky. I was having lived that particular pain that ended up requiring this. As this scales, I was like, hey, maybe we could avoid some of that pain. But I totally respect the view of we have to really get a better definition before we go solving it. So thank you.
So I believe some of this was resolved since the last TAC meeting where we noted that we did not have correct permissions for the current TAC within that GitHub organization. For example, on that specific issue number 87, Josh, I believe, has approved with merge rights, and I also have the ability to merge right now. I'm not clicking the button to be clear, but I'm saying I think for for that specific issue to merge that, I think we've resolved that very short-term tactical need. I guess the question I have is, do we, to your point, like, do we need TAC eyes on that issue to say as a stopgap measure to maintain the status quo? Do we need to merge that PR and then forward the discussion around what automation tooling should we pursue within the broader OpenSSF? Is that the correct sequence of actions that need to get taken?
Well, so the configuration file actually addresses another issue that was also raised, which had to do with giving more information, description about the repository that would be grabbed by some other LF tool to populate the website. So independently of the right access privilege question, there's also this question of providing additional information. So I don't know the answer to that part.
How's this? Here's what I would propose starting forward. If there is a situation either you can't do or you don't like, why don't we just try to capture that real quickly in a TAC issue? I'll post it. You know, hey, I can't do X, and I think I should be able to, or I can do X, and I don't think I should be able to, and that'll at least start moving towards what Vicky had already mentioned. The what are we trying to accomplish? And then we can look and say, oh, we can't really do that with GitHub permissions or not. I suspect you're right. There may be some problems that are just simply that the current configuration is easily fixed, but it's not correct. Let's fix that first. And then we can identify, we're going to need something like Prow or Prow itself. Does that seem like a way to forward at least?
That makes sense to me. I don't want to, if we can do something like click a button to solve the short-term issue that provides a minimal amount of structure that then facilitates us having a broader discussion, that seems like it makes sense to me. But I don't also, if it's jumping too quickly to a solution that people are already saying, wait a minute, this may not be sufficient for what we may broadly need, I would agree with you, David, that we need to capture the what are people trying to do that they can't do so that we actually have some requirements to guide us in terms of addressing with tooling.
Okay, well, I'm going to quickly create just permission issues issue, and you know, people post against that, and then we'll try to fix it with just the current settings, and then if things that we can't fix, then we'll have at least a start of that list that Vicky mentioned.
All right. Does that answer your question or not?
Yeah, I think, as I said, I mean, I agree, you need to figure out the long-term goal so that you know which steps make sense. Otherwise, you might do something now that's kind of pointless because it's going to be replaced. If we want to use Prow, for instance, maybe putting a settings YAML file makes no sense. So yes, I think that's right.
Okay, great. All right, well, we're at the end of the time. I appreciate everybody's engagement today, and look for many of the action items in terms of the project donation work that's going to happen offline, as well as the table that Jory has graciously agreed to work on for us. Thanks for all those who are raising their hand and stepping in and helping. And we will speak as a group again in 2 weeks. So thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Thank you. And issue 90 is the permission one, so please reply. It's in the notes.
Great. Thanks, David.
Thank you.